Gotcha. Enough of that noise. Here's some of my noise. Yes, greeting, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick. You know, censorship is a big problem down there on Earth, and no one's talking about it. So we're going to talk about it. That's why I've interrupted Second Nature. I'm not censoring Second Nature. Consider it an editorial decision. Hit it, Nancy. Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted English-only sign 40,000 tons of armed with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
I live in a communication satellite, so I watch a lot of TV. I saw Judas Priest was found not guilty of inciting teenage suicide, but two live crew are facing a whole slew of obscenity charges. A museum in Cincinnati showing some Robert Mapplethorpe photographs has been charged with obscenity, and Salman Rushdie is still in hiding. It's okay, I won't tell him you're here. You can't burn the flag in America, but you can burn comic books in New Zealand and Britain. What? Oh, what? Burn books in this day and age? Oh, yes, friends. Customs officials in Kiwi and the UK have been destroying comic books. And comic book shops north and south of the 49th parallel are facing obscenity charges. And as well, print shops are not printing comics that they deem as offensive. All this censorship, I'm telling you, the world is going straight to heck.
Comic books are very big on good as opposed to evil, right as opposed to wrong, responsibility as opposed to selfishness. If all of the derangos on the religious right would actually read a comic book once in a while, instead of holding them up and saying how they're satanic, they would see that they really do come down firmly and solidly 100% on the side of proper behavior. And even if they don't, it's none of their damn business. Let them stay in their churches, and we will stay in the museums.
Some artists would argue that we aren't affected by what we read or see on TV. Of course we're affected. We pay money to see movies and to read books precisely because they will affect us.
I have a friend that is a sales rep to these different hospitals, and she met this little boy that had all this turtle stuff around him, and his fingers were bandaged, you know, because he got them jammed trying to lift up a sewer cover to go down to the sewer. And you know, I sent the kid some comics and said, you know, please, you know, the turtles are on TV, they're in the movies, they're not in the sewer, and you know, stuff that would, you know, that bothers me. I would never want anybody to get hurt.
Okay, so we're affected by what we see, but can a silly Ninja Turtle comic or a heavy metal album really turn Archie Andrews into Freddy Krueger?
Somebody made the point yesterday that a man like, say, Reverend Donald Wildman, who knows what is best for us to see on television, and who knows about all of this satanic corruption. This man is exposed to this material 24 hours a day. He looks at this crap constantly. He looks at the girly magazines. He looks at the child porn. He looks at people doing it with animals. He looks at comic books that are filled with Satanism. He listens to records that are played backward and make no sense except to him. And somehow, the Reverend Donald Wildman is not corrupted. Now, does this mean that he is better than all the rest of us poor slobs? That if we look at this, we will certainly go to hell immediately? No, what it means is that he is full of caca. He is full of horse pucky, and if people would stand up to fools like him and Phyllis Schlafly and all of the rest of these goddamn censors, we would find a much better condition of life for all of us. Not to be too perforce about it.
There were no limits at all on comic books until the mid-1950s when, among other things, Dr. Frederick Wertham wrote a book, Seduction of the Innocent. The book said, in effect, that comics were taking young, impressionable minds and turning them into fascist stormtroopers who would go around torturing the family pet with power tools. Parents got excited. Oh, yes, comics turned our boy bad. We tried to beat it out of him, didn't we, Thelma? We locked him in the fruit cellar for weeks on end, but nothing could undo the damage done by those satanic stories about little Lotta. Do we get paid for this?
The Comic Code Authority came into power in 1954. To make a long story short, there was a congressional hearing that was trying to link comics with juvenile delinquency. and trying to say that comics were responsible for juvenile delinquency. The comic book industry in America panicked. Richard Goldwater, who was at that time the head of Archie Comics, put together with the other affluent, and this is important, the other affluent New York comic publishers, the Comic Code Authority, which was a self-regulating board. It was an in-industry censor, if you will. And it was an attempt to circumvent what they feared, which would be government regulation. Well, it worked. There was no government regulation of comics. But I don't believe it was due to the creation of the Comic Code Authority. I think it was due to the fact that the Senate hearings discovered that, indeed, comics were not solely responsible for juvenile delinquency. Nevertheless, the Comic Code Authority reigned over the art form in America and by proxy in much of Canada, because many of the comics coming into Canada were American in production, for roughly 20 years.
The Comic Code actually forbids the use of the word flick in a comic, because they were afraid back then with the bad printing that the ink might run together and flick might look like plick.
My work has been censored, certainly. I came to work in comic books working the most stringent censorship code in entertainment, which is the Comics Code. I have seen publishers quake in fear when they receive 3 or 4 letters from some crackpot. But these days, no, not at all. I don't feel censored in the least. I think there's going to be some more fights coming. But right here and now, I'm working freely.
So, who saved us from the evil Comic Code Authority? Spider-Man. Enough said.
The first comic that really pushed a hole in it was the issue of Spider-Man that Marvel put out that dealt with drug addiction. It was an anti-drug comic, but there was a rule in the Code Authority that depiction of drug use could not be presented at all. And of course, by the 70s, drug use as a problem was too prevalent to just put those sorts of blinders on and pretend it didn't exist.
After the 3 special drug issues, the Comic Book Authority label returned to Spider-Man. The code wasn't removed permanently from a comic book until 1984, and this time it was a DC comic.
We did an issue of Swamp Thing. It was Swamp Thing number 29. It was a story entitled Love and Death. It was a story about, well, I won't go into what the story about. Basically, it dealt with imagery that showed The Walking Dead. It built to a double-page spread of The Walking Dead surrounding the key character of that story, Abigail, who's the heroine of Swamp Thing. The code balked at that. It was a code ruling that you could not present The Walking Dead in an unsavory manner. I'm not sure what the wording was. We fought it. We fought it on the basis of, I remember I sent a newspaper clipping to our editor from the local drive-in showing her what was being printed in newspapers all across America and much of Canada to advertise Night of the Living Dead type films. You know, it was just as graphic as what we were doing. When they read the book carefully, they found out that there was an element of incest in the book. I won't go into what it was, but it was a key plot point, and we were not using it in an exploitative manner. Alan Moore, coming from England, you know, felt that there was nothing wrong with that. He said, I remember his quote at the time was that, well, growing up in England with the royal family, you assume that incest is a matter of course. Basically, we fought with them. We basically said that if they were going to censor the book, that we just didn't care to do it anymore. We would do something else. We wouldn't leave the company. We wouldn't pack up our marbles and go home. We would just divert our attentions in another way, or ask them to put the book out in direct shops only, which would mean it did not have to go through the code. Their decision was to simply not put the book out with a code approval. We did not have code approval. The sales, in fact, went up on the book. I don't believe they went up because we were presenting unsavory material in an exploitative way. I believe they went up because of the quality of the material that we were doing. We won many awards the 3 years that we were on the book, both in America and in England.